Welcome back. In this final part of this module, you're going to get a chance to practice some of the conditional logic that we've been learning in parts 1 and 2. Keeping track of where we are in the outline, we've already completed part 1, which is where we explained what conditional logic is. Part 2, where I demoed an example using case logic. And now we're going to wrap up with part 3, where you have an opportunity to practice on your own. For example 33, we have 6 different parts. For the first part, this is going to be pretty easy. This is just review. You're going to create a column called month by extracting the month from the drop-off date time column. That's something we've done a couple of times, so you should be pretty familiar with that. And if you're not, just look back at previous examples and you should see a pretty easy way to do it. Part 2, we're going to create a column called payment description. So this is going to be your new column, payment description. And it's going to be derived by converting the payment type, which is already in the data, from the numeric value to its text description. And the text description, you should be able to find that within your schema. Part 3, find the total number of passengers, the total fare amount, and the total trips. And when we're hearing total, what are we thinking of? We're thinking aggregate. Okay, so you're going to need to do some aggregate thing for part 3. For part 4, find the average cost per trip for each month and payment type. 5, filter your data to only January, March, and June. And so I have a hint in here. Hint, try the or in your filter statement. And for a bonus, if you can, display part 3 using US standard comma format and decimal places. And I didn't put this, but go ahead and put it for part 4 as well. Go ahead, pause the video. When you're ready, we'll come back and I'll show you how I tackled these problems. Welcome back. I hope you didn't find that too difficult, but if you did, that's okay. We're all learning. So let's go ahead and tackle this from the top. So the first thing we want to do is create a column called month using the drop-off date time column. All right, so we're just going to start building the shell of the query and kind of see what we can pick up, and then we'll start actually tackling the problems. So we're going to have select, we're going to have from. We know we need a where because of part 5. We know the from is from our table. The column month we're going to get from drop-off date time, so let's just put that here. Drop-off date time. We're going to create payment description by converting payment type. Okay, so let's get payment type in here. We want to find the total number of passengers, fare amount, and trips. Okay, so fare amount, I think it's just fare amount. We want total number of passengers. I think that's passenger count. And then I'm going to put in a little note here. Need to find number of trips. Okay. And then filter your data to only January, March, and June. So we want a filter here. We're going to comment that out for right now. And let's just run what we have. We'll put a limit 10 just so we can look at our data. Okay, so drop off date time, payment type, fare amount, passenger count. Okay. So let's use our extract function to pull out the month. Extract month from date time as month. Okay. And let's see what this looks like. Okay, great. So this starts with the month of January. So now that we know how to get to our month, now we can tackle this where filter. So we want to filter our data to only January, March, and June. That should really say or June. So we want to say where this thing, we know this equals month, where this equals 1, or this thing equals 3, or this thing equals 6. So putting in notes, pulls for month equals January. Same thing as above equals June. Whoop. March. Same thing equals June. All right, and let's get rid of our limit here and let's pull it. Now, if you're following along with me, you should have this number of rows. So I don't know how many that is. That looks like 56 million or so odd rows. And we can check it because we can see we have month 1, 3. If I go to the end, maybe I'll see a different one. 3. Okay. And if I were to do a select distinct month, I could verify that I have 1, 3, and 6 in here. Now, something you might have done, and this was a little bit of a trick, but just something to make you think, something you might have done is you might have done and. Why might you have done that? Well, because all of our examples thus far have been using ands with our where. So where month is this, and vendor ID is that, and total is blah. When you use and, what that means is that every single thing has to match. So we would have to say that you pull out the month from this drop-off date time. If you're saying and, what you're saying is that this needs to equal 3, and it needs to equal 6, and it needs to equal 1. And when you're saying that, you're like, well, that can't be because it's either 3 or 1 or 6. It's not 1 and 3 and 6. And SQL tries really hard to work like you speak. So when you're just saying it aloud what you need, sometimes that can help you debug it. So we see immediately there's no data to display. And that's because we know for a fact that it can either equal 1 or 3 or 6. And so that's why you'd want to use the function or. Okay, so we're going to roll that back. Okay, so now that we have this, now what we need to do is we need to think about how we're going to find the number of trips. And so the number of trips is really what we know each row is equal to 1 trip. There might be multiple passengers in it, but it's equal to 1 trip. So what we just want here to find the number of trips is a count star, just anywhere where it's not null, as total trips. We want passenger count to be the sum as total passengers. And we want the fare amount as a sum. We want the total as total fare. And since we're doing these aggregate functions, now we need to apply our group by, because whenever you do an aggregate function, you have to have a group by. Everyone has a role in the party. Either you're being aggregated or you're being grouped. So since these last 3 are being grouped or being aggregated, that means that 1 and 2 need to be grouped. So we add that right after our where, group by 1, 2. And let's go ahead and order our data just so we can look through it a little better. And we'll order it by the same columns. Okay, so we see we have month, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. January is repeated 5 times, 1 for each payment type. Same for 3, and same for 6. Okay, so that feels good. Looking at our numbers, we're just going to use our brains to just see if this makes sense. For total fare, we see that this is a very large number. It looks like it's the biggest one. Okay, that makes sense. Total passengers, looks like it's the next biggest one. And then total trips appears to be the smallest one. Well, why is total trips less than total passengers? That's because on a given trip, you might have more than 1 passenger. So suppose we only looked at trips where the passengers were equal to 1. Let's add it. So if we were to filter to only our passenger count is equal to 1 and our months, how we would do that is we would put this. And this is where filters get a little tricky when you're mixing up ands and ors. And we'll explain that in another lesson, but for now, just kind of follow along and we'll go through a different example at a later time. But if we were to say where passenger count equals 1 and our months are equal to these values, and we were to run it, we would see that total passengers is equal to total trips. So what does that mean? That means that if I had 1 trip, I had 1 passenger in it. We're going to get rid of this because that's not what the question asked for. But when we're looking at it and using our intuition, we can see that our total passengers is higher than our total trips because certain trips have 2 or more people. Okay. So now that we have this, we're feeling pretty good, but we didn't accomplish part 2, which is create a column called payment description by converting payment type from the numeric value to its text description. Okay, we can add that right under here under payment type. And since we have 5 different payment types, we should use a case statement and not an if. So we're going to say case when payment type equals 1, let me get my formatting right. When payment type equals 1, then, well, I don't know. I don't know what then. Let's see. Let's look it up. So we're just going to search payment type to find it nice and easy. Payment type. Okay, 1 equals credit card. So when payment type equals 1, then credit card. When payment type equals 2, then cash. When payment type equals 3, then no charge. When payment type equals 4, then dispute. When payment type equals 5, then unknown. When payment type equals 6, then voided trip. And I made a typo right here. Okay. And so after you've done your case, your whens, your thens, we don't need an else here because every single thing every single payment type has a category for it. But just to be complete, just to make sure, suppose that there was a row that was missing a payment type. We can put that in here. We're going to say if you're not equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, then, so we're going to say else, if you're not equal to anything else, we're going to say missing payment type. And then we're going to type in end as payment description. Okay, so now that I've added in, okay, so now the next thing I'm getting is a little error because payment type is a string and I listed all of these as a number. Okay, simple enough. I just need to encapsulate these in quotation marks. So that's what I'm going to do. And that just goes to show you that even people who know SQL a lot, they still make the same little mistakes of not checking what their data type is. Okay, so now I have that my query is going to run, but I need to add in another group by. So I need a group by 1, 2, and 3. Group by 1, 2, 3. Okay, so looking at our data, we have payment type equals 1. Now we know that that's credit card. And we can see credit card, total passengers, total trips. And we see, looking through all of our different payment types, we do have an unknown, but we don't have any missings. So what that means is that every single row for these months has a value of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And I don't see any voided charges. So it looks like voided charge is probably very rare, or voided trip might be encapsulated in dispute, and it might be like an extra thing that they probably shouldn't have included. Okay, so now we are 90% there, but we need to figure out part 4. Find the average cost per trip for each month and payment type. The cost per trip. So if we said the cost per person, we would say our cost, total fare, by our persons, total passengers. But what we want is the total cost over the total number of trips. And so if you ended up dividing by total passengers and you didn't get this total trips part, that's okay. That's a really easy mistake to make. And the total trips was a little bit trickier than the total passengers, so I totally get that. But just make sure that you understand how we got to total trips and the process of what we're doing. And don't get too hung up if you made a mistake along the way. Okay, so now that we have our sum of our total fare, so what we want to do is we want to divide total fare over total trips. So to do that, you can do sum fare amount, comma, divide count star. Okay, so the average cost per trip for a credit card is $12, for cash is $10, unknown is $12, Some of you might have been, hey, what am I doing here? Why aren't we using our handy dandy safe divide? You can totally do that. So we could do safe divide. This would be even better. Sum of our fare amount, comma, our count star, as average cost per trip safe. And we see that this is the same value, and that's perfect. That's exactly what we were expecting. You might be asking, what is this number really? Because we did a lot of fancy footwork here and it's looking complicated, but it's like, what exactly is happening? What we did is we took the total fare, we took this number over this number to receive the average cost. And if you're not sure, we can always use our calculator. And we are going to say 124,609 divided by 9353. And that gives you 13.322. Perfect. That's exactly what we expected. All right, so the last thing we were supposed to do is we're supposed to format these columns into our pretty way to do it. And so we see that total fare can be a float, total passengers is an int, and total trips is also an int. And then our average cost, of course, is a float. So let's go ahead and just pull up our formatting that we used in our previous lesson, paste it in here, and then just kind of fix it up. Okay, so I just did a copy and paste from my notes before, and if it's an integer or a whole value, we use the D, and if it's a float, we use this one. Okay, so now we just need to wrap in our fare amount. We're going to do format, and we're going to do this thing right in front, comma, the sum, and we're going to close parentheses, and then oh, I messed it up because fare amount needs to be this one. So I'm just going to stick them in here. Okay. For passenger count, format, parentheses, D, close parentheses, comma, here. And then let me just copy this again because that's too much to type. For our count of trips, we'll do the same thing. Close parentheses, and then for our average, we need to go back to the float, comma, close Okay. And you can start seeing, especially with this last guy here, when you start chaining or linking all of these built-in functions together, your code can start to become very hard to read and scary very quickly. But since we built this piece by piece, it should feel pretty straightforward to us. Because we see first, we safe divide. Well, first we find the sum of the fair amount, we find our count, we divide the two, and then we format it. But if I'm someone new who's just looking at this, this might freak me out. So I'm going to put a note in here. First, we sum the total fair amount and count total passengers. Second, we use safe divide to divide fare over passengers. Third, we use format to put in pretty format. Okay, now let's run. And here we go. So now we see our total fare is in dollars and cents. Passengers and trips have the comma. And then our average cost per trip with the safe divide is also in dollars and cents. And so there you go. That's it for this mega piece. Like I said, if you got tricked up along the way, don't be hard on yourself. Like, we are really starting to advance and up the ante, if you will, in terms of the course. So just make sure, like, if you felt a little rocky about it, go through it again. Take a break, come back tomorrow, take a look at it, maybe go through it a couple times, maybe try a couple practice problems on your own, doing different things with the data, and see if that can make more sense for you. But let's jump back to the PowerPoint and wrap up this module. Okay, to wrap everything up, we completed a multi-step problem, a multi-step complicated problem using conditional logic and filters. So we used multiple ORs in our logic to filter out our data. Previously, we had pretty much only been using ands, so this was something new. We also practiced conditional logic using a case statement. We practiced our function safe divide and our aggregate functions sum and count, so we could also throw in that we were practicing our group by. And then we also practiced formatting our output to make things look pretty. In our next segment, we are going to switch gears and we're going to start something called CTEs or subqueries. And this is a huge, huge, huge component of SQL. And if you're doing any interviews or if people are asking you your understanding of SQL, this is a very, very popular place to start. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention and that you feel really good about all of the concepts that we've gone thus far, because things are going to start to get more advanced. If you have any issues, just drop a comment. I'm happy to help. And if you need more practice problems, I'm going to be working on creating some of that so you can get some more reps under your belt. But yeah, I'll see you next time. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, I would be so appreciative if you could like the video and subscribe to help me create more content for you. Thank you.